She was soaked, exhausted, and late for home, but when a stranger's voice cracked through the storm, something in her heart refused to walk away. That single moment, that small choice, would change both their lives forever. The rain fell in relentless sheets over New York City, turning the sidewalks into rivers and blurring the streetlights into halos of gold and white. It was past midnight, and the city had mostly folded in on itself. Only the occasional cab splashed by, and neon signs flickered against the wet pavement. On 42nd Street, Lena trudged forward, clutching the straps of her worn-out backpack and pulling the thin hood of her coat tighter over her head. Her shoes squished with every step, soaked through after hours of standing, moving, surviving. She had just finished a double shift at the diner. 10 hours without rest. Her back ached, her legs burned, and her head throbbed from hunger. But home was still 20 minutes away, and so was her real reason to hurry. Nina. Her 12-year-old sister, waiting in their tiny apartment, feverish and fragile, wrapped in layers of old blankets. There was no food in the fridge. No medicine yet in the cabinet. Just a girl with flushed cheeks and two big eyes, depending on Lena to somehow make it all okay. Lena's entire world was held together by tired hands and whispered promises. She turned down the block, eyes low, when a voice cut through the sound of the rain. "Miss, please. I'm sorry. I think I'm lost." Lena stopped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was scared. Fragile. And in this city, voices like that didn't last long. She looked up and saw a man standing beneath the broken awning of a closed bookstore. He was drenched to the bone, his coat dripping, hair plastered to his forehead. In his hands was a soaked piece of paper, trembling as he tried to keep it dry. "I lost my phone," he said, the words thick with a French accent. "I was walking from the station. I thought the hotel was nearby." Lena hesitated. She had places to be, important places. But one look at him, shivering and soaked, and she recognized the kind of lost that had nothing to do with directions. The kind of lost that went deeper. She stepped closer, eyeing the paper. The ink had bled, but she could still make out the hotel's name. She knew the street. 7 blocks away. Opposite direction. "You've been walking in circles," she said gently. "You turned left when you should have gone right." He closed his eyes with a sigh, clearly embarrassed. "Of course. I knew it." She should have walked away. Said good luck and disappeared into the rain like everyone else in this city did. But something in his voice or maybe in his helplessness stopped her. "I can walk you there," she said suddenly. He blinked. "No, you don't have to, I know the area," she cut in with a tired smile. "Besides, you look like you might turn into an icicle." He laughed then, soft and grateful. "Merci, thank you. Truly." And so, without knowing his last name or anything about him, Lena turned and walked side by side with a stranger under the dark Manhattan rain. They didn't talk much at first. The silence between them was quiet, not awkward. The kind that only exists when two people don't owe each other anything. The city pulsed around them in muted sounds, splashes of tires, the soft rattle of wind between buildings, the distant honks of taxis navigating the storm. "My name's Julian," he said after a while, his accent curling around the syllables. "From Paris. First time in New York." "Lena," she replied. "You picked a hell of a night to visit." "I was supposed to arrive this afternoon. The flight was delayed. Then my luggage disappeared. Then my phone died, and now I am the perfect cliché tourist." Lena smiled faintly. "You're not the worst I've seen." They walked on. He didn't ask why she was out so late. She didn't ask why he looked so broken inside. Some things didn't need explaining. When they finally reached the hotel, tucked quietly between a bank and a souvenir shop, Julian turned to her. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You didn't have to." "It's fine," she said, brushing rain from her bangs. "Just glad you found your way." He pulled something from his coat, a handkerchief, clean and neatly folded. "You gave me your time. Let me give you something warm." She accepted it, unsure why, and nodded. "Good night, Julian." "Good night, Lena." And then she turned and walked back into the rain, unaware that this simple act of kindness would soon alter the entire course of her life. He was a stranger from a different world, yet under the flicker of a streetlight and the weight of a rain-soaked city, something passed between them, something real, something rare. And neither of them would ever quite forget it. By the time Lena reached her apartment, the storm had only grown heavier. Each step up the narrow staircase echoed like thunder against the creaking walls. Her fingers were numb as she fumbled with the keys, and the weight of her soaked coat pulled her shoulders down even further. She pushed the door open and stepped into the tiny, dim space she called home. It smelled of damp socks, detergent, and something warm that wasn't quite comfort, but had long become familiar. The heater hissed in the corner but didn't really work, and the single overhead bulb flickered once before surrendering to the darkness completely. She slid off her shoes at the door, her socks making a wet squelch against the peeling linoleum floor. "Nah," she called softly, setting her bag down. In here came a faint voice. Lena stepped into the bedroom. Her sister, Nina, lay curled up beneath a pile of mismatched blankets. Her cheeks were flushed, her hoodie clinging to her too-thin frame. She looked small. Too small. Lena knelt beside her, brushing strands of damp hair away and pressing her lips to her forehead. "Still warm." "Too warm." "Still hot?" Lena whispered. Nina nodded. Lena kissed her again, then stood, walked to the kitchenette, and opened the fridge. A half-used bottle of soy sauce. Half a lemon. 1 egg. She opened the cupboard. A single pack of instant noodles, crumpled but sealed. That was it. She boiled water in a rusted pot, cracked the egg in, added a dash of soy, stirred it slowly. Not a meal. But it would have to be enough. Survival, not satisfaction. Back in the room, she fed Nina spoon by spoon, her sister's eyes closing slowly with each swallow. After she fell asleep, Lena returned to the kitchen, still damp from the rain, and opened her laptop. The screen took 2 tries to come alive. The scholarship application was still half finished, left untouched for weeks. She picked up where she had left off. She didn't write about being tired or scared or hungry. She wrote about wanting to teach. To matter. To build something that could make kids like Nina believe they had a future beyond bills and broken ceilings. By the time the sun began to rise, she had edited and re-edited her story until it no longer felt like a plea, it felt like a promise. The next morning came too fast. She skipped breakfast, tied her damp hair back, and stepped into her scuffed sneakers. As she left the building, she passed the landlord in the hallway. He didn't smile. "You're behind again," he said, crossing his arms. 3 days, or the locks change." "I'll get it," Lena replied, her voice tight but steady. "I promise." The diner greeted her like it always did, with sizzling oil, shouting orders, and plates that never stayed clean for long. She tied her apron, tucked her exhaustion under a smile, and got to work. By noon, her legs were aching. By 2, her back had gone numb. At 5, she stole a sip of water, sat for 3 minutes behind the walk-in fridge, then got back up when her name was yelled again. During her short break, she leaned against the wall in the alley behind the diner. The rain had stopped, but the city still felt soaked, as if it hadn't dried yet from the night before. Her co-worker Carla lit a cigarette beside her and squinted. "You look like you wrestled a thunderstorm last night." Lena chuckled without humor. "Something like that." "I saw you," Carla said. Walking with some guy. Tourist? Yeah, Lena said. He got lost. Didn't know where his hotel was. Carla blew out a puff of smoke. He looked like he could have paid someone to carry him. I didn't help him because he was rich, Lena said, straightening. I helped him because no one else would have. Carla studied her for a beat, then shrugged. You're gonna burn out. Maybe, Lena said, looking up at the dull gray sky. But not today. She walked back inside, tied her apron again, and smiled at the next customer. But somewhere deep beneath the muscle memory and survival instinct, a small memory lingered. A man standing in the rain, grateful, laughing softly. His eyes not judging, not demanding, just seeing her. And that feeling, faint and unspoken, refused to disappear. She wasn't chasing love, fame, or miracles, she was chasing rent money, flu medicine, and enough strength to face another day. But even in her quiet chaos, life was preparing her for something far more extraordinary. That night, Lena walked home slowly, her feet dragging over cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlight reflections. She counted her tips as she walked $18.43. Barely enough for a bottle of fever medicine and a loaf of bread. She slipped the bills into her coat pocket with a quiet sigh and crossed the intersection toward the dim apartment building she called home. She didn't think about Julian. Not really. The rain-drenched man with the French accent, the gentle voice, and the lost expression, it had all felt like a dream. A good deed done. A quiet moment shared. She assumed he was already back to his comfortable hotel room, probably asleep beneath expensive sheets. Whatever he carried, whatever silence was behind his smile, wasn't hers to wonder about. But still, the memory of his voice, his laugh, the handkerchief he'd handed her so deliberately, it stayed with her like a phantom warmth on her cold skin. She unlocked her door and stepped inside the apartment. Nina was asleep, curled tight under her blankets, cheeks still flushed but less than before. Lena moved quietly, tucking the medicine into a drawer, boiling some water to make broth out of nothing, and sitting alone at the table while it steamed. Her eyes drifted to the old laptop again. The scholarship application still sat open, cursor blinking, waiting for her to believe she was worthy of finishing it. She reached for it once. Then again. Then pulled her hand back. She was so tired. The next day blurred into the one before it. Another 10-hour shift. Another set of orders barked out by impatient customers. Another meal she skipped to make sure Nina had something hot to eat. Her feet throbbed, her wrists ached from lifting heavy trays, and her smile felt more painted on than ever. But there was a strength in her. Quiet but rooted. She moved with the rhythm of someone who didn't have the luxury of quitting. She folded napkins, wiped syrup off menus, laughed at regular customers' bad jokes, and carried on like her entire life didn't depend on tips and hope. During her break, she stood in the alley again, phone in hand. Still no replies. Still no responses to her application. No calls about aid, or jobs, or chances. Just silence. She almost deleted the application. Almost gave in to the voice in her head that whispered, "It won't matter. You'll always be stuck." But she didn't. Instead, she went back inside, smiled at the next customer, and poured another cup of coffee. That night, she found a piece of paper in her coat pocket, the handkerchief. The one Julian had handed her. She unfolded it, stared at the neat fold, the soft clean fabric, and placed it gently in the drawer beside her sister's medicine. She didn't know why she kept it. It wasn't valuable. It wasn't hers. But it reminded her of something rare. Of being seen, if only for a moment. And that was enough to keep going one more day. When she looked up from her shift and saw him standing at the door, dry, polished, and nothing like the man she'd rescued, her heart didn't skip a beat. It braced for impact. The bell above the diner door chimed with a soft gingle, barely audible over the clatter of dishes and the buzz of morning chatter. Lena was behind the counter, pouring a fresh pot of coffee, her eyes dull with exhaustion. She didn't even glance up at first, just another customer. Another table. Another moment to survive. But then something made her pause. A silence that cut through the usual rhythm. A stillness in the doorway. She looked up, half expecting a confused tourist or maybe an old man looking for a senior coffee special. Instead, she saw him. Julian. But not the drenched, trembling man from the rain-soaked street. This Julian wore a crisp, tailored coat, shoes polished to a soft gleam, and a dark scarf wrapped neatly at his collar. His hair was combed back, his stance confident but still gentle. And when his eyes met hers, something flickered: recognition, warmth, and something more. Something like belonging. He smiled, small and honest. "Lena," he said, stepping forward. "You found me when I was completely lost." Her hand froze on the coffee pot. She blinked, unsure if it was real or some sleep-deprived mirage. "You made it," she managed to say, her voice softer than she expected. Julian reached into his coat and pulled out a small item wrapped in clear plastic. He held it out between them like an offering. "I believe this belongs to you." It was the handkerchief. The same one she had used to dry her hands that rainy night. Now washed, pressed, folded neatly, preserved with care. "I couldn't leave the city without returning this," he added, "and thanking you properly." Lena hesitated. Around her, plates clinked, customers chatted, orders were shouted across the line. Her manager was yelling at someone in the kitchen. The usual chaos swirled behind her. But in front of her stood a man who felt like he'd come from a different world entirely, yet remembered everything that mattered. "I have a break coming up," she said quietly, surprising even herself. Julian's smile deepened. "I'd be honored to borrow it." They stepped out into the city. The morning was bright, the sidewalks still wet from the previous night's rain, and the air carried a rare peace. They bought coffee from a street cart. His black. Hers sweet and creamy. No fancy cafes. Just a park bench still warming in the early sun. For a while, they didn't speak. Lena sipped her coffee, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Julian sat beside her, patient, steady. Then he turned and asked, "So, how are you?" She smiled reflexively. "I'm okay." He tilted his head. "No, I mean, how are you really?" The question hit her harder than she expected. Not because it was dramatic, but because no one had ever asked it like that, gently, sincerely, with no agenda. She let the silence stretch between them. Then finally, she spoke. "Tired," she said honestly. "Most of the time. Worried. Hopeful sometimes, and sometimes not." Julian nodded slowly, as if those words weren't strange or burdensome but simply true. "And you?" she asked, glancing at him. "You found your phone, your hotel. What brings you back here?" He exhaled, his breath curling in the cool air. "I stayed longer than I planned. Something about being lost here, it reminded me how to feel small again. It's humbling." She chuckled. "Most people hate feeling small." "I used to," he said. "But now, I think it's when we're small that we notice the most." They finished their coffee in silence, not needing to fill the space with stories or explanations. It wasn't romance. It wasn't some fairy tale spark. It was something quieter: recognition. Two souls, both tired in their own ways, finding something still and soft in the noise. Her phone buzzed. "Break over." "I should head back," she said, standing slowly. Julian stood too. "May I see you again?" She paused, not suspicious, just surprised.
It wasn't often anyone asked to see her. Not the waitress. Not the sister. Just Lena. Maybe, she said. I work a lot.
I'm good at finding people, he said with a smile. She gave him a small nod and turned back toward the diner. Julian watched her go, a coffee cup in one hand, a hopeful silence in the other. And Lena, walking back toward sticky tables and loud voices, felt something shift inside her.
Not love. Not yet. But possibility. It didn't start with fireworks or fairy tales.
It started with shared coffee, quiet mornings, and the kind of peace you don't find unless you've been hurting for a long time.
The city is never truly quiet, not even in the early hours before dawn.
But in those slivers of time just before the streets filled with honking cars and shouting vendors, Lena and Julian found something close to silence.
And in that silence, something began to bloom.
They met in the mornings, before her shift, before the world demanded all of her.
It was always brief.
15 minutes, maybe 20, enough for a coffee and a conversation that didn't feel like small talk.
Julian would usually be waiting when she arrived.
Not in a limo or tailored coat, but in a sweater or plain jacket, holding 2 cups, black for him, sweet and creamy for her. Some mornings they sat on a bench in Union Square, where pigeons cooed and newspaper stands were just starting to open. Other times they walked the High Line, watching the city wake up beneath them.
They didn't talk constantly. They didn't need to.
The silences weren't awkward. They were resting places, spaces where neither had to pretend. One morning, he brought croissants wrapped in brown paper. They sat on a bench outside the public library, splitting one between them. It was warm, flaky, and imperfect, just like the moment. "This feels stolen," Lena murmured.
Julian raised an eyebrow. Stolen? Like we've taken a piece of calm before the world gets up and takes it back. Julian nodded, smiling.
"Then I hope no one calls the police." Lena laughed, a real laugh, from deep in her chest, and he looked at her like he was seeing color for the first time after a lifetime of grayscale. They began trading pieces of themselves in small, unwrapped packages. "My parents died in a car crash when I was 16, Lena told him one day, her voice flat but not bitter.
"I had to grow up overnight. Nina was only 6.
"I'm sorry," he said quietly.
"I wanted to be a teacher. Still do, I guess. But life had other plans." He didn't offer cliches. Didn't promise anything. He just listened. And slowly, he began to share too. "I used to be someone important," he said one chilly morning in Bryant Park, watching a squirrel wrestle with a half-eaten bagel. "At least, the world thought so. My name was in headlines. I gave interviews. People quoted things I said in meetings." She looked at him sideways. "And now?" He shrugged. "I haven't felt like anyone in a long time. After my mother passed, I kept moving, but everything inside me went still." She didn't say anything right away. She just reached out and touched his wrist, lightly. Not with sympathy. Just presence. That was the magic between them. It wasn't loud or flashy. It wasn't made of declarations or desperation. It was built from seeing each other, not the masks, not the survival personas, but the raw, human truth underneath. One morning, snow dusted the city in soft white. Julian met her with a new scarf, gently wrapping it around her neck before she could protest. "New York wind has no manners," he said. She rolled her eyes, but she didn't remove the scarf. Another morning, Lena handed him a thermos. "Your voice sounded hoarse yesterday." "Tea with honey." Julian blinked, genuinely touched. "Are you always this kind?" "Only to people who return my handkerchiefs," she replied, smirking.
And just like that, their story kept unfolding, not in dramatic turns, but in a series of moments so quiet they could almost be missed.
But neither of them missed them. Not anymore.
For Julian, it was the first time in years that someone didn't want something from him.
Lena never asked what he did for work.
Never prodded about his money or past.
She cared about who he was now, not the version people Googled.
And for Lena, it was the first time someone asked about her dreams, not just her shifts. The first time someone listened without trying to fix her or pity her. They were both broken in places they didn't talk about.
But with each passing morning, those cracks didn't feel so sharp. They were becoming something. Not yet love.
But something just as rare, safe. She thought fairy tales didn't belong to people like her until she realized she had unknowingly wandered into one.
The problem?
The prince had never told her he had a crown.
It started like any other morning.
The diner was slow, the breakfast rush had passed, and Lena was wiping down the counter when Carla, her coworker, burst from the back with her phone in hand and eyes wide with disbelief.
"Lena," she said, practically slamming the phone onto the counter. "Is this your lost tourist?"
Lena leaned over, expecting something silly, maybe a joke about a celebrity look-alike. But then she saw it.
Her breath caught. It was Julian. Not Julian in his thrift store coat and warm eyes, but Julian on a tabloid website.
Headline bold and loud: French tech billionaire Julien Duval spotted in NYC, mystery trip raises questions. A photo followed him walking through Central Park, scarf loose, coffee in hand, the same gentle smile she knew so well. She stared at the screen, her heart racing. Beneath the photo, the words blurred: CEO of Duval Technologies. One of Europe's wealthiest men. A reclusive innovator. On personal sabbatical since the death of his mother.
Lena stepped back from the counter. She couldn't breathe.
The Julian she had shared coffee with. Walked with. Laughed with. The Julian who had listened to her talk about ramen dinners and scholarship essays, was a billionaire? Her hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron. She didn't speak for the rest of her shift.
Not even when Carla tried to press her. Not when customers called her name.
The noise of the diner faded, drowned by the roaring inside her chest.
That evening, she didn't go to the park where Julian usually waited. She walked straight home. Locked the door.
Sat on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts spiraled.
He'd lied. He'd omitted the biggest part of who he was. And the worst part? She hadn't seen it. Not once. She thought she was good at reading people.
But maybe she was just desperate to be seen, so desperate that she had fallen for a fantasy. She held her sister longer that night, whispered promises she wasn't sure she believed, and cried into a pillow she couldn't afford to replace.
The next morning, Julian came to the diner. He didn't bring bodyguards. Didn't dress differently. Just the same coat. The same warm expression.
She met him outside before he could step in.
"So it's true," she said. He nodded. "Yes." "You're a billionaire." "Yes."
Her voice wavered.
"How long were you going to keep that from me?"
He looked down, then back at her.
"I didn't plan to tell you. Not at first. Because I didn't want that version of me to be the one you met." She laughed bitterly. "What version did I get, Julian? The lost tourist act?"
"No," he said firmly.
"That was real. Everything I said was real. I was lost, just not in the way you thought."
She crossed her arms, jaw tight.
"You lied to me."
"I hid something, yes," he admitted.
"Because the moment people hear my name, they stop listening. They stop looking. But you saw me before any of that. You think I should be flattered, she snapped. That I passed your test?
No, he said softly.
I hoped you'd get to know the real me first. The part that doesn't sign deals or give interviews. Just Julian.
But I'm not just some kind waitress, she whispered.
I'm tired. I'm angry. I'm barely holding it together. And I don't belong in your world.
I don't care about that world, he said.
But I care about you. She stepped back. That's easy for you to say. You have the option to leave it. I never did. I never will.
He reached out, carefully, but she pulled her hand back. You have no idea what it's like, she said, eyes glistening.
To grow up thinking you'll never matter unless someone chooses you. And now someone did, and it still feels like a joke.
I never meant to make you feel that way, he whispered.
I know, she said. But I feel it anyway. A silence fell between them. Thick. Final. If you need space, Julian said gently, I'll give it. But not because I've stopped caring. I haven't. She didn't answer. Just turned. Walked down the block. Her coat flapping in the wind.
Her tears mixing with the cold.
And for the first time, Julian didn't follow. Because now he understood this wasn't about the secret. It was about the wound it touched.
And for Lena, walking away from the first thing that had felt like home in years, was the hardest thing she'd ever done. He left her a letter, not to win her back, but to remind her she was already whole. And in that silent space where love didn't beg or chase, she found the courage to become everything she once thought she couldn't be.
The envelope was small. Plain. No address, no grand seal, just her name, Lena, written in clean, familiar handwriting.
It had been left at the front counter of the diner during the afternoon rush.
Carla handed it to her with a smirk. Another lost tourist, or is this one a pen pal? But Lena didn't smile.
Her hands trembled slightly as she turned it over. She didn't open it until hours later, when the shift was done, when the rain was drizzling again, and when Nina was finally asleep in the next room. The world was quiet. Still. Like it was waiting. She sat at the kitchen table, the lights low, the room smelling faintly of dish soap and cheap instant noodles. She opened the envelope with slow fingers. Inside was the handkerchief. The handkerchief. Washed. Pressed. Neatly folded. Just like that first night. And beneath it, a letter. She unfolded it, her breath catching as she read the words, written not for effect, but with a clarity and simplicity that made her chest ache. Lena, you reminded me how to feel. Not as a man with titles. Not as someone followed by headlines or chased by wealth. But as a human being. I came to New York to disappear. I found you instead. I know I hurt you. That was never my intent. But I see now that some wounds aren't mine to heal. I only hope that one day you'll believe you are worthy. Not because I say so, but because you finally see it for yourself. And when that day comes, if it ever does, I hope you'll let someone love you. Truly. Thank you for everything. Julie and Lena didn't cry at first. She sat there for a long time, her fingers curled around the fabric, the letter pressed to her chest. The silence didn't feel empty, it felt filled. Not with regret, but something softer. Something quieter. Not joy. But release. She didn't write back. Not right away. Instead, she folded the letter and placed it inside the top drawer of her dresser, beneath a stack of old college brochures and faded photographs. A place where it could live quietly, but not be forgotten. The next day, she walked into the community college 2 blocks over and picked up a student application form. A week later, she sat down with the counselor, explaining her financial situation without shame.
She asked, firmly and clearly, what it would take to finish her teaching certification. "I don't want shortcuts," she said. "I want a plan."
She also signed up to volunteer at a shelter on the east side.
They needed someone to tutor immigrant kids in English and math. It wasn't paid.
It didn't come with benefits or social media attention. But when she sat across from a 10-year-old who barely spoke English and sounded out words with him one syllable at a time, she felt something settle inside her. Like a door opening that she didn't even know had been locked. Her days changed. She still worked at the diner, still wore the same cracked sneakers and came home exhausted.
Rent was still late more often than not.
The heater still clicked and clanked. But her steps were different.
She stood a little taller. Laughed a little louder.
When people asked how she was, she didn't just say tired, she said, tired, but doing something about it. One afternoon, a child she tutored drew her a picture. It was of her, standing in front of a chalkboard, a crown on her head. "Miss Lena is a queen teacher," he had written beneath it. She hung it above her bed. She still missed Julian.
The ache hadn't vanished.
The rawness of their last conversation still lingered like a bruise. But it no longer defined her. It no longer made her feel small. Because in the space he had given her, not filled with apologies or roses, but quiet encouragement, she had remembered who she was trying to become.
Not someone waiting to be saved, but someone finally ready to stand in the rain alone, and know she would survive.
He didn't come back with roses or riches, he came with empty hands, open eyes, and the quiet strength of a man who had finally learned how to stay. And this time, she was ready. The late afternoon sun painted long golden streaks across the sidewalk outside the community learning center. Children's laughter spilled out of the building, high and unburdened, bouncing off the red brick walls like music. Lena stood at the doorway, helping a small boy zip up his too-big jacket while his older sister waited with a backpack twice her size. "Miss Lena, you're strong," the boy said, blinking up at her. "You zip the jacket better than my dad."
She laughed softly. "Don't tell him that. He might get jealous."
When the last of the children had disappeared down the block, their footsteps fading, Lena turned to head back inside.
That's when she felt it. That feeling. That quiet shift in the air.
She turned slowly, and there he was.
Julian.
Standing across the street, wearing jeans and a simple jacket, no scarf, no pretense.
Just him. Not the polished billionaire.
Not the lost tourist.
Just Julian.
His face held no expectations, no demands. Just calm, steady presence. And in one hand, he held a small wooden box. He didn't move toward her. He waited. And when the door clicked shut behind her, Lena stepped down to meet him. "You came back," she said, not accusing, not amazed. Just stating what her heart had already recognized. "I didn't know if I should," he replied.
"But I knew I had to."
She looked at him closely. He looked the same and yet different. Like someone who had walked through a fire but chosen not to burn anyone else with it.
"I'm not here to fix anything," he said. "I know you don't need saving. You never did."
Her eyes softened. "I'm here because you changed my life.
And I couldn't forget that." He opened the wooden box. Inside was a ring. Simple. No diamonds. No shine. Just smooth, carefully carved wood shaped into a perfect imperfect circle.
"I made it," Julian said, voice quiet. "From a tree in my mother's garden. The only thing I kept when I sold the house."
It's not expensive. It's not flashy. But it's honest. Lena stared at it. Her breath caught. I don't want a yes from fear, he said. Or from pity. I want a yes from peace. From the part of you that knows you're not small. That knows you're enough. Because you are. You always have been. Lena blinked back tears. Not from heartbreak. Not from sadness. But from the weight of finally being seen, not as someone broken or in need, but as someone whole. You waited, she whispered. I would have waited forever, he said. She didn't take the ring. Not yet. Instead, she reached for his hand and closed his fingers gently around it. You can put it on later, she said, smiling through tears. For now, just walk with me. And so they did. Down the sidewalk. Past the old laundromat that had become a place of laughter and learning. Past the kids running down the block. Past all the pain they had carried alone. They walked side by side. No fanfare. No promises whispered under chandeliers. Just the quiet, powerful decision to stay. To try. To love. Not with perfection. But with presence. It didn't end with a kiss or a ring, it began with a classroom, a crown drawn in crayon, and two people choosing to build something that mattered. Not for the world. But for each other. The building at the corner of 8th and Delancey used to be an old laundromat. The windows were cracked, the tiles uneven, and the paint on the brick faded with age. But inside, something new was being born, something beautiful, loud, imperfect, and alive. They called it Clare House. Not after anyone famous. Not after any donation or headline. But after the idea of home. A place where children and dreamers and forgotten hearts could come and be reminded that they mattered. It had been a year since Julian returned. A year since Lena took his hand on that sidewalk and said, just walk with me. They never threw a party. Never posted matching photos or made grand declarations. They simply stayed. Grew. Loved. Built. Lena taught 4 days a week. Reading. Writing. A bit of science. A lot of believing. She still worked occasional shifts at the diner, not because she had to, but because she said it kept her humble. The regulars noticed she smiled more now. Stood straighter. Glowed in a way that had nothing to do with makeup. Julian, once the man behind boardroom deals and billion-dollar decisions, now wore jeans with paint stains and spent his mornings fixing leaky faucets or drawing animal posters for the classroom walls. The children didn't know his full name. He simply introduced himself as Mr. J. One Friday afternoon, after reading Charlotte's Web aloud in a room full of squirming second graders, Lena was wiping chalk from the board when a little girl tugged on Julian's sleeve. Mr. J, she asked, are you rich? He paused, then knelt to her height, smiling. Not in the way people think. She nodded seriously. Okay, and ran off to her friends. Later that day, Lena stood at the back of the classroom, hands on her hips, watching Julian replace a flickering light bulb. He was standing on a chair he insisted was definitely safe. She shook her head, amused. Her hand absent-mindedly rested on her belly, now showing just enough to make the kids curious. There had been no big announcement. No framed ultrasound. Just one quiet morning where he kissed her forehead and whispered, I can't wait to meet the third member of our team. As Julian climbed down from the chair, one of the boys raised his hand. Miss Lena, he asked. How did you and Mr. J meet? Lena smiled, her gaze drifting to the window where clouds were forming again, gray and heavy with memory. It was raining, she said softly. He was lost. No phone. No umbrella. Just a crumpled map and the wrong street. Why did you help him? Another voice piped up. She thought for a second. Because no one else would have, she replied. Julian walked over, brushing dust from his hands.
And because, he added with a grin, she said I look like a very wet puppy.
The kids laughed.
But then the room grew quiet as Lena looked around at the mismatched chairs, the chipped mugs filled with crayons, the hand-painted posters on the walls. True love doesn't always come wrapped in diamonds, she said, her voice warm.
Sometimes it shows up on a rainy night, with nothing but a lost map and a heart waiting to be found. Julian reached for her hand, gently interlacing his fingers with hers. They didn't need to say more. Because in that little building, love didn't wear suits or come with press releases. It came with scraped knees and sentence fragments, with chalk on your hands and a thermos of tea passed across a bench. It came with presence. With showing up. With choosing someone every single day. As the kids packed their bags and ran out into the dusk, Lena stood in the doorway watching them disappear into the arms of mothers, siblings, and foster parents. She leaned into Julian's shoulder. "Do you think we've done something good?" she whispered. He kissed her temple, his hand resting gently on her growing belly. "I think," he said, "we've started something that matters." And maybe that's all a great love story ever needs to be. Not perfect. Not loud. Just real. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to let us know. Hit that like button to honor the strength of people who never give up even in the rain. Click subscribe and be part of a community where real love, real hope, and real stories come alive every week. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever helped a stranger, or had one change your life? Your words matter. Your heart matters. And your story might be the next one we tell. Like. Subscribe. Share your heart below.